you'd be hard-pressed to find any group on the planet that actually doesn't understand that climate change is a really real threat to humanity. We look at the numbers, and it's staggering that like how much CO2 we're pumping up in the air. We've known for a long time that carbon dioxide is the main key greenhouse gas. Now, it's not as particularly strong as some of the other gases, but we do know the fact that our atmosphere only has 3 parts per 10,000 units of carbon dioxide. That has led to an appropriate amount of global of greenhouse effect on our planet. So we look at it in like right about 3 parts per 10,000, we have this nice global temperature. And we look at either case on the other side of that, less than that or more than that, and we see planets that have that can't have liquid water in both directions, because too little greenhouse effect leads to too cold of a climate. All water is essentially ice. The opposite is also true. If you have too much greenhouse effect, all the water evaporates, and in both cases, life on Earth as we know it wouldn't sustain itself. It wouldn't be possible. We know that it's connected to greenhouse gas emissions like carbon dioxide, and yet here we are pumping up an absurd amount of greenhouse gas every year. Humanity, interesting case where you have small groups of people actually denying that correlation exists at all, that our understanding of the greenhouse effect is not real. You don't have to look far to find how real it is. You really don't. Typical humanity. Really, we've seen cases like this over and over again throughout human history. A certain group with money fights back against what scientists say and manage to convince the overall population that what they're saying is true and what scientists are saying is false, sometimes decades. And all the while, scientists slowly convince people that what they're saying is factual, and eventually, once the number of facts piles up and the evidence is so plain as day that the average person can see this happening, they know for a fact that this thing that scientists are saying is true. They can't deny it anymore. Then they start taking action about it. This happened with tobacco smoke. Scientists said for a long time that smoking tobacco was a terrible idea. Tobacco industries employed scientists to find evidence that was wrong. It took decades for scientists to finally, and doctors to finally break through to people and say, like, this crap is messed up. You should not smoke this. And then we've been backpedaling ever since. We've been spending millions, easily billions even, dollars advertising to people to convince them to stop smoking. It's a lot of money. And another example, leaded oxygen or leaded gasoline, leaded oxygen. If you like, one way to help gasoline burn more efficiently inside the engine is to add a tiny little bit of lead to it. So gas companies used to do that. They added lead to their gasoline pumps. That's why gasoline pumps now always say unleaded gasoline, because for decades lead was added, and that scientists said this is a terrible idea. This is a heavy metal. You are on mass quantities causing lead to go up into the air that people are breathing, and it's a heavy metal that directly affects the nervous system. Again, for decades, people were convinced that leaded gasoline was okay because oil and gas companies employed people to tell the general population that leaded gasoline was okay. Decades of them convincing that. And to what end? When are we going to learn the lesson that when scientists raise a huge red flag and say, guys, this is a big deal, when are we going to listen and actually do something about it? We're still getting convinced by oil and gas companies that global climate change is a farce. It's not real. Maybe it's caused by the sun. Maybe it's caused by natural phenomenon. It's caused by volcanoes, they say. The amount of alternative ideas out there that makes it seem like our burning of fossil fuels is not the main contributor is astounding. They've really put in a solid effort, but you know what? The evidence that scientists have is just overwhelming. There is no pushing back against it. But you play on the emotions of people, and you manage to convince them still. I really hope it doesn't get to a point where people have to be convinced when real bad stuff starts happening on the planet, like has had to happen before, when cancer rates go up and brain disorders, psychological disorders go out of whack, like with the tobacco and leaded gasoline. But we know that there's this problem. And it's good to see that for the most part, governments are actually on board. Governments know it. There's a lot of governments that are willingly looking at this problem. Look at the states. Like we've got Justin Trudeau and with our Liberal government very openly saying this is a big problem and we need to solve it. It's not something Canada should be sitting on the sidelines for, but Canada should be one of the front runners dealing with this issue. Same with the states. Barack Obama is a huge proponent of dealing with climate change. And we see global leaders all over the world pushing this issue as something that's necessary. And still, man, we just don't have the general population convinced yet that this is a problem. So, good news on that front. Every year, or every couple of years at least, there is a convention on climate change held by at least the top 21 countries on the planet. These conventions, they're held in different places all over the world. They just held one that was in Paris over December 2015, and they came to some pretty awesome agreements. The governments overall agreed that they're going to do something to cut back on emissions. In some cases, by huge amounts. Some countries committing to 20%, other countries committing to 50% reduction. It's awesome to see that happening. But they're still going to run into barriers the whole way. That they're going to run into these barriers of people just saying, "Nah, that ain't real." It's so frustrating. As a scientist who knows that like this stuff is real, I really hope that eventually we can get to a point where we just listen to scientists when they do their work. Now, we've got to have a healthy amount of skepticism too, because we don't want to be controlled by scientists in any other way that we want to be controlled by other groups. But to blatantly ignore a red flag as big as this one would be at our own peril. So what regulations have we put in place to try and help protect us from things? We want to protect our environment. We have to protect our environments. That's where we get all of our food, all of our water, our air, basically anything that is involved with our basic needs, our survival, we get from the environment. So we have to do lots of things to protect at least key environments. Global climate change will leave no ecosystem unscathed. Global climate change will affect every single one of them. So this is a huge deal. So we have come up with some regulations, some pretty awesome one. For example, the Kyoto Accord. Back in the 2000s, it was decided that different countries would commit to, similar to the Paris Convention that just happened, different countries would commit to reducing their emissions by a certain amount. Lots of countries hit their mark. Lots of countries didn't. But that's why we have these renewed conventions to renew the efforts to get countries to do things. Those are global efforts to cut things down. Those aren't the only efforts that exist out there. Within our own borders, Canada has done lots of things to reduce global emissions. Provincially, the NDP government in Alberta just released a carbon tax. The goal of the carbon tax is to charge every individual, whether it's at the gas station or pumping up oil and gas out of the ground, whether you're an industry or an individual. If you are dealing in carbon dioxide, you are going to pay an extra tax. If you're pumping up carbon dioxide, you'll be taxed a little bit extra for it. That money is promised to go into the hands of something that will move people away from carbon. So all that carbon tax that's paid will be reinvested into green companies and other places that, in the end, will cut down the amount of carbon. Oil almost has to be regulated in a lot of ways because, man, crappy things keep happening with oil. First, pipelines all the time. Pipelines burst. They either fully burst open or they spring a leak. Either way, it's a pressurized system, which means that liquid will come spraying out of there. Contaminates huge areas, even if it's on land. In water, that problem is exponentially worse because it's even harder to stop some of those pipes. You end up with problems that are, crazy. Like the BP oil spill, for example, also called the Deep Horizon oil spill. There was an oil rig out in the ocean that exploded. There was an explosion. It was tragedy unto itself, but that tragedy was only compounded when the falling oil rig cracked the pipe that was feeding oil up from down beneath the surface of the ocean. That pipe just started spewing oil into the surrounding ocean. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have a plan to solve an issue like that. And it's all about cost versus risk. How much money are they going to pump into planning for all these different emergencies when the risk of those problems occurring is fairly low? Companies don't. If they don't have to, they won't. And then you end up with problems like the BP oil spill, where there was a pipeline ruptured and spilling out into open water, and they had no way of solving the problem. It took them weeks to come up with a solution, further weeks to produce the cap that they had designed to cap off that pipeline, and then they had to install it. By the time they installed it, the ocean was just coated in oil. Look at some of these pictures. It's crazy the amount of oil that was pumped out. Whew. And then there's other problems. If we're not pumping oil by pipelines, we're shipping it by tanker or by train. Either one of those cases, trains derail and have caused huge contamination in areas, even derailing in cities, in towns, releasing their payload onto the surrounding environments. The Exxon Valdez tanker that sunk, man, that released not as much as the BP oil spill, but a lot of oil, a devastating amount of oil into the area. No matter which way you look at it, this chemical is just disastrous. Oil, in every way, whether we're digging it up, transporting it, or burning it, in every part of that pathway, we screw up environments catastrophically. Huge areas, global areas, and we still rely on it. moving away from oil is a real challenge because most bang for your buck, oil is still the cheapest unit of energy that exists. You get more power, more electricity generated from 1 unit of oil than you get from anything else. And that's why we use it. It really boils down to electricity and power for like cars and automobiles, other vehicles. So how do we move away from it? It's like I said, with the NDP's direction of the carbon tax, like it's really boils down to investing in green energy. My man Bill Gates, really huge amount of respect for the guy. He's such a philanthropist. He gives a lot of money to really noble causes. Him and Mark Zuckerberg at the same time, they agreed with each other that that the richest people on the planet should definitely be taking a leading role in protecting the planet if they can. Bill Gates donated $2 billion towards green technologies, towards investing in the research and development of better and more efficient green technologies. Remarkable man. Really, like he's done so much for this planet, not just the technological advances that have propelled humanity into the future. He's also contributing to making sure that the planet that he is developing, that he's helping develop at a really fast rate, he's also going to help us. Just total respect for Bill Gates. Look him up. Look him up if you don't know the kind of stuff that he does, because he is worth your time. And he's proving that we're worth his time too. So let's wrap up. We are in an interesting conundrum here on the planet where we know that there's big issues, huge environmental issues. And that's what this whole entire unit is about, is just bringing those to the forefront of everybody's knowledge. Here in Alberta, we know that there's issues. We know that the general population still doesn't agree with those issues. Scientists and governments do know that these issues are real and something that is worthy of tackling. Education is the key to getting people to understand problems. That's what it came down to with tobacco and leaded oil. We had to educate the population until so many people knew that these were real problems that it was abhorrent for the companies to still continue to ignore it. And here's the catch. Even though the companies eventually had to change their ways because they were regulated to do so, they didn't go out of business. Tobacco's still there. Gasoline's still there. They adapt. That's what makes these companies so rich, is because they're smart. They have the research and development into ways to work around any problem. Not any problem, but most problems. They have those innovations. But and they have the ability to come up with new ones if they need to. It's just a matter of getting them to do it. Signing off on a piece of paper that says, you have to do this, and you don't have a choice. And they come up with ways. They always do. It's amazing, the innovation of humans when they're pushed up against the wall. We're pretty clever creatures. And there's nothing that stops us from doing it now except public opinion. And that's you guys. So you guys need to be part of the group of people who wants this world to be a better place. It's everybody. Everybody's got to be part of it. So, on top of that, there's laws that have been written that are part of moving towards progress, and a lot of those laws, they fall into different categories of either being global or local. And then we talked about oil in particular, because right now that's our tobacco, that's our leaded gasoline, that's our ozone layer issue. That's the issue of today. The global issue that the global community is working on. And the global community involves all the people, governments, and corporations. the biggest step is getting the people on board. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Till next time.